Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the SaaStrana Application Security Podcast. Today, we have with us John, founder and CEO of StratusVue. John, in this podcast, is going to share with us how StratusVue evolved from being a printing, scanning, and document management service for the construction business to evolving to becoming a full-fledged SaaS platform catering to the construction vertical. He's going to share with us some of the challenges for implementing security controls and processes specific to the construction business for a SaaS company. Some of the key insights he gives is, unlike other verticals like fintech, healthcare, and other verticals, construction business deals with unregulated data and hence presents its own set of unique challenges to institute security policies and controls proactively and include it as part of the SaaS stack to the customers and get them to value it. He also shares some candid experiences of his tryst with attacks and incidences and how it transformed the way he looks at application security and brought in changes and instituted processes, cultural changes within the company to look at security as a proactive aspect and an integral part of the SaaS business that they have built. Welcome to the show, John. Welcome to the SaaStrana podcast, John.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you tell a little bit about yourself and StratusVue?
So we are a construction technology firm based out of the Chicago area in the United States. StratusVue manages construction projects all over the world. As everything that used to be a piece of paper and a workflow, like what an architect would draw plans or write specs, has turned into a PDF or an Excel or some type of Autodesk product. What we've done over the last years is to convert everything that used to be a piece of paper and those workflows and put it up into the cloud for people to be able to manage construction. So for most people, it's really boring. For me, we love it. We've got a great team.
Fantastic. So is it fair to say that you're a SaaS platform focusing on the construction vertical?
We are 100% a SaaS platform focused entirely on construction and real estate. So not just the process of building, but we also manage tying together the information to when a building operates.
Awesome. So tell me the story about how did it come about, the current journey? How did it start up? How did you pick this vertical? Was there any pivots? Any interesting story on the journey on how you came about to the current state you are in right now?
Sure. So when I got out of school, I had gotten work in printing, construction printing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's back in the day of blueprints. There used to be big rolls of paper around and lots of stacks of paper. And that was in the 80s and 90s. And towards the latter part of the 90s, we started to see, long before a PDF, people were scanning to a Group 4 TIFF. Group 4 TIFF is what drives a fax machine.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw the evolution of paper going away. And I was just young enough and stupid enough to think that I could impact the environment of construction. So from that, we started writing technology in probably 2002, 2003, in parallel with the printing companies.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2008, the printing companies were consolidated. They bought all of our companies. They also thought at that point that the internet was a fad and they didn't like it. So they let us take the software and convert from a product-based e-commerce purchasing system to a workflow and document management system, digital rights, stuff like that. So it was an interesting segue to actually go from the analog world to the digital world.
And when did the transformation to a SaaS happen? 2003, I think it was more about paperless to this, and now it's a complete SaaS platform. When did that transformation happen?
So it took a few years to actually transform it from e-commerce and hard paper ordering to a full SaaS. I would say it was really 2012, 13, 14 after we survived the craziness of 2008, and everybody was looking for efficiencies or the ability to save a dollar.
Mhm.
So what we did was we had really educated the industry on how to convert from distributing mass amounts of paper into distributing via FTP sites or through what at that point we were plansandspecs.com.
Mhm.
We rebranded in 2015, so I'd say it was probably all done by 2015 that it really hit a full SaaS model.
Yeah, and I think it also timed well with that's probably the time where the cloud computing and the public clouds and all those things was also taking off.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even though right now for more than a decade I've been on the security field, my first job in the software was also in the printing area. I started my career at Corel Draw graphics.
I know it well. Corel Draw.
Yeah. So wherever you hit file print, and there is something called an imposition engine, which allows you
Hmm.
um, to create different layouts. And booklet printing, there is something called bleed margins. So I started my career developing software for making printing easier too, but not not focus on construction, but more on so I do know a little bit about printing technologies.
So we were actually there, our companies were evenly divided 50-50. Half of it was construction and the other half was desktop printing,
Okay.
desktop publishing, large format graphics. So very familiar. And it's still an issue today when you think about, when both in construction and in marketing. In construction, it's all about where you insert your
Mhm.
plans. It has to be a 0, 0, and in Corel Draw, that was part of your bleeds, and that
Yeah.
was part of your crops. So very familiar. They're very much related.
So you can thank me. So I was part of the original team. So I
Thank
have one
you.
more badge of honor for that. Yeah. Uh, Excellent. Very interesting journey, John. And I think it's been a long time. You have obviously seen the transformation, gone through various pivots, and still there, going strong. And right now, a full-fledged SaaS company focusing only on construction vertical. So, are you focused only on US or all over? What geographies do you operate in?
So we have contracts or agreements in North America. We do have
Mhm.
some in Mexico, some in Canada, mainly the United States.
Okay.
Part of our 2023 and 2024 efforts are to expand. We have hosted projects in the EU. What's interesting is when we have specific projects,
Mhm.
the participation happens globally.
Mhm.
We were the software that was used for Skyscraper of the Year, where it was actually accessed in 26 countries for
Mhm.
the engineering that was done all over the world. Now, the agreement was based out of Chicago or the United States, but the amount of collaboration that happened globally, it's amazing sometimes. At this point, we actively have participation in 65 countries.
And that's the beauty of SaaS, right? Once you put it out, and I mean, it's a global economy, and SaaS actually further accelerates the adoption of a software product, which is focused on a particular. Of course, you might have those nuances which are country specific, region specific, but as a core product solving a specific problem for a vertical, it sort of democratizes, in a true sense, the adoption globally if you do it right.
Agreed.
So, yeah. So your home base is US, but anybody in the construction probably can get value by using your product. Uh,
Correct.
so now on the SaaS platform, like what does the technology stack look like? I mean, get like hosting. Do you host it yourself? I'm assuming that you would have hosted everything in the public cloud, because any SaaS chooses to choose a public cloud as the hosting provider. What are you building everything yourselves? Are there any APIs? What does the technology stack look like?
So, interestingly enough, from the hosting perspective, we have our own data facility.
Wow,
We have an
that's
active
unique.
passive. Yeah, we
Uh-huh.
have an active passive where we do roll over
Mhm.
uh, into into the public clouds, AWS, Azure, OCI, Oracle. We do create redundancy depending on the customers that we serve to. And as far as the tech stack, it's a near 3-tier, business layer, application layer, presentation layer. We did start all of this in Microsoft Stack when we started this. The biggest change I've seen over the last 5 to 7 years is switching around from the frameworks that are a little slow and sloppy to API driven and much more functioning or user-friendly user interfaces. So one of our big things right now is we have a big process going over to React.js for our web apps. We've been working in React for native for the mobile for the last 3 years. And before that, we were actually doing device-specific applications.
Yeah. So talking about API, so obviously your applications probably has APIs that other people can consume, as well as you yourself are using any third-party APIs as part of the service. Is it a fair statement? Like, it's are you an API model where you expose your APIs for others to consume and pay you for that?
Correct. We built an ETL that actually enables all of our APIs to be consumed in a metered and monitored format. Pretty protected in what we do. But what we did do when we were converting, we're still a Microsoft stack and we still do the traditional frameworks. But having converted to an API service method, it made it much more consumable by integration partners, by clients with their analytics. So APIs are the now and the future.
Yeah, it is. It is. In fact, anything application security, application stack now have analysts also adding API, applications and API. In fact, the internet traffic from application to application is more than humans to websites or web apps. So, and of course, IoT is, yeah. So how do you protect, now coming to the topic of security, right? What steps do you take, or when did you look at security? What are you doing to protect these APIs on your web applications?
So we have protected APIs that you need specific keys to get to, and we rotate or roll our keys on a pretty regular schedule. So from the testing of the application to make sure, of course, we use Indusface. I think everybody should.
Right.
But we actually have a security group that monitors who has access, and although they may be able to see an endpoint, they can't access anything without going through our security review.
So that's from an access control and authentication standpoint, right? But APIs also has well-defined boundaries in terms of function definition, acceptable parameters, and inputs. So a malicious person, I mean, it's all the cloud. One of your person who's pretending to be a client, but with a bad intent can do parameter tampering or inject certain things. So do you do anything to do vulnerability assessment? At what point in your development cycles do you pay attention to that? Anything that from others would learn from?
We pay attention to that all the time. So a little backstory here, which you said no curveballs, but I'm going to give you one. In 2018. In July of 2018, we were cryptoed. We were actually compromised on 3 of our 5 brands. And it was interesting because we had been under a regular scan through different parties for what was, the OS top 10 type of a thing, pen tests, but they were able to actually come in through a known Microsoft flaw. So at that point, we really changed our security methods or our access methods. I know that the buzzwords out there these days are zero trust, which is a bunch of malarkey. It still comes down to humans in every regard. So the definitions of what we put up in front on how they could be accessed, we do have when we go through the security reviews and people do it, our production environments are hard locked. Those are completely locked. When somebody comes in from a development perspective, we require 3 stages of them getting into our environment, where they start in a staging or a development environment. Then they go to a QA, which is the big security review. And then ultimately QC is the last step before we get to production.
Mhm.
So we have put in a pretty solid framework of, the access point. As far as the injections, we do actively every week look at what the opportunities are for the injections,
Mhm.
um, with authentication and without. There's some interesting ways now that people get in. Actually, I read something this week that it seems like the last month the buzzwords are Chat GPT.
Yeah,
And that people are using Chat GPT to try and hack APIs.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's really, where there's a will, there's a way.
yeah.
Um, but I do believe that we take a lot of a very pragmatic approach to making sure that we're in a good environment when people go to access data.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing the candid story. I mean, not many people, especially this is what I love about SaaS and startups, um, openly sharing our vulnerabilities and our mistakes, and that's how people learn. And I've heard this from many people in closed door discussions about stories about they getting hacked, but don't share those information and what they did to protect themselves. So let me build on that and go to the next part of the question. What changed after 2018? I mean, obviously you got cryptoed, and was there a complete shift in terms of the way you look? Did you look at security as an integral part of the business as opposed to just a barrier or a insurance? Any changes that happened in the way you looked at it?
Everything changed.
Okay.
Absolutely everything changed.
Mhm.
So before that, we had a full-time security consultant and somebody internally dedicated to this process. And from an executive or a C-suite level view, I had trust that everything that we had established over the years was being followed. What 2018 taught me was to trust but verify.
Mhm.
And it was really the introduction of lowest level of access at a much stricter level,
Mhm.
and segmenting who and what. So we took from the hardware standpoint, we broke that down into 3 steps. From the software standpoint, we broke that down into 3 steps. From the audit standpoint, we broke that down into 3 steps. So what was originally what we had bullet pointed of maybe 5 key things that we monitored, that suddenly became 15. And there was no single person who could access all 15.
Mhm.
Logically, again, I think most failures come down to human failure, and in 2018, it was for us. It was human failure.
Mhm.
Even though there was a known vulnerability in the Microsoft stack, there were steps to mitigate that risk,
Mhm.
and the steps weren't necessarily followed. So instead of trusting that everything was being done, we went through, a release level, a quarterly level, a semi-annual level, and a much deeper annual level of third-party eyes. Nothing pisses people off more than having someone else check their work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And actually, it was abrasive for the next year, but now we've all settled into it. And it is something we all trust in.
Mhm.
If you think about in 2018 when they cryptoed us, the transference of Bitcoin was illegal.
Mhm. Mhm.
You couldn't put it on a credit card and go buy Bitcoin and do everything. And we did end up paying a portion of it till we were under security. But if you think about the process then, um, that was involved in just getting it back. Step 1 was remediation. Step 2 was um, verifying. Step 3 was analyzing where those mistakes were. So ultimately, it came down to, I don't want to call it zero trust because I just think that's such a BS term, but trust but verify
Uh-huh.
at a corporate level was what we had our biggest change in.
Yeah. Trust but verify. I think it applies to all walks of life and even more in security, right?
Yes, it does.
Uh, so great, fantastic story. Thanks for sharing that, John. Did you also see an evolution? Of course, you said that it transformed the way and the processes and process you put in place, and also a little bit of cultural changes within your company because you said that when you got third party involved, initially it was perceived as abrasive, and then eventually. But was there also a change in buyer behavior? That you saw, especially given your SaaS, where your customers also emphasize and ask you questions on what is it you're doing about security of your SaaS application before they buy from you. Was that change happening or it's mostly, yeah. So would like to get your view from you, especially in the construction
It's
buyers.
a
Yeah.
very interesting topic. So when we get to the bigger agreements that we have for enterprise type access, that conversation is now a requirement.
Mhm.
In 2018, it was not a requirement. And 2018 was the beginning of the big crypto stories we hear. Back then, it was occasionally, and nobody liked talking about it.
Mhm.
Nobody likes talking about it now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Construction companies as a whole are not known for spending on IT like they need to.
Mhm.
So they were particularly vulnerable over the last, uh, a lot still are. Depends on the size of the firm.
Mhm.
So if you build $10 million worth of buildings every year, you're considered very small.
Mhm.
And you maybe spend 0.1% or 0.2% on IT.
Mhm.
Well, what it ended up being was construction became a big target
Mhm.
because typically, even though it's $10 million and that's small in volume,
Mhm.
it still gives you the ability to get in the middle of cash flow of $10 million.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
So the little guys are aware and fearful, but they still don't necessarily take the steps. Now, and since the whole adventure began in the Ukraine
Mhm.
with Russia, we have seen an absolutely elevated approach
Mhm.
to construction companies now requiring this. And actually, it's interesting because every construction company needs to get insured and bonded, and they need to have certain controls in place from insurance companies. And insurance companies are now putting a requirement in for them to get their bonding and to get their insurance to have a method to guarantee security.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you remember 6 or 7 years ago, right around Christmas, Target was hacked
Yeah, yeah.
and it shut down Target everywhere through their electronic systems. What nobody knows about that story is it was actually the malware was put on by a construction company, a mechanical contractor in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Didn't know he was compromised and he was logging on to request money and it took over the entire network. So construction has been vulnerable. What I see now is the evolution of the insurance companies and the people who control the money are
Yeah.
getting into the game. Now, the federal government actually started mandating in the states it's called DFARS. It's a
Mhm.
NIST compliancy. And
Mhm.
if you were to do any work for anything that's federally funded, you
Mhm.
need to have certain security requirements. So I see this now as becoming something relevant. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean they enjoy spending money on it. No,
Mhm.
who does?
Yeah, nobody
But
does. Yeah.
they do now see that it's a requirement. So I said a $10 million company may spend 0.1%. The $1 billion companies, the ones who do, 400 or 500 projects a year that are 5 million to $50 million, you know what? They'll spend, a point and a half,
Mhm.
which is a big number. I mean, simple math says, $1 billion, 10% 100 million,
Yeah.
1% 10 million. So
Yeah.
they're spending 10, 12, $14 million. And when you have that backstop, they have the ability to be better suited to deal with, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, stuff like that.
Mhm.
So it's something that's very relevant. It's coming to market in our space more than it ever has.
Mhm.
And it is the future for all of us. Just ask ChatGPT.
Yeah, absolutely. I think ChatGPT, I mean, like any new technology, right? I mean, I have my own views that are good and bad. You can also use it
Same here.
for creating good things.
Mhm.
Yeah. Uh, no, it's interesting. I mean, on the construction, I mean, in terms of a scale of 1 to 10, if I look at finance or insurance or BFSI, um, any other vertical, right? E-commerce, uh, there is a certain level of regulatory bodies and compliance needs which are at a certain maturity stage, which automatically drives, like if you have to be a fintech, the compliance requirement and the regulation requirements automatically guarantees a certain baseline of security.
Amen.
Uh,
But you're talking about regulated data.
yeah.
So if you talk about fintech, finance, banking, insurance, everything that involves a dollar, that's regulated.
Mhm.
And once you're regulated, now you need to conform to a set of standards.
Yeah. Yeah.
But construction data is non-regulated data. Although they're accounting and ERP systems, which are
Mhm.
typically not front-facing to the web,
Mhm.
but their financials, which is more around job cost,
Mhm.
not true accounting, is
Mhm.
unregulated information. So when we did our integrations into these accounting systems, the amount of reviews that we had to get into to be able to write via API through the ETL into their environment is why we have you. You know
Mhm.
what? We need somebody to look at what the APIs push and what the APIs consume. So construction companies in the web are starting to put their toes into the water of regulated data. And it's interesting. I think that there'll be a paradigm shift in 2025, 2026, where there's going to be the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah. Correct.
And it's all going to be based on technology.
Good. I think, and you mentioned that one of the examples you gave was across 26 countries. Uh, do you see in any of those countries where the level of maturity and what they expect from you is a little bit like in the last podcast, I was talking to somebody from Saudi Arabia, a SaaS company in Saudi Arabia.
Wow, there is
Um,
one?
There is one, surprisingly, it's Marmon. And they were talking about there is a central national certification authority body that
Yep.
you had to be compliant with for
Yep.
any businesses to subscribe to your SaaS application. So they have certain process in place across verticals horizontally.
Yep.
And for you to cater to a SaaS, get a go-to-market strategy for a Saudi Arabian customer or business, automatically mandates you have to meet that compliance. So even though you broadly mentioned construction industry is just getting its feet a little bit wet and trying to get there, especially dealing with a lot of non-regulated data. But is there examples of any countries where you would put them at a higher maturity level in this?
Well,
Uh,
it's an interesting topic because you're talking about data sovereignty.
mhm.
And data sovereignty, Australia is very strict that if you are building and you're actually managing, the data has to be within Australia's borders. Um, Saudi Arabia has data sovereignty. They're building that 20-mile long high rise over the next 15 years. That's going to be the new shocking building of the world. The contractor who's involved in that, we're familiar with them and the steps they've had to. When you start getting to that elevated level, now you're not talking about SaaS like a startup. A startup could never be reliable enough to
Mhm.
actually perform in those worlds.
Yeah.
And when you talk about data sovereignty, we've run into it where we've made decisions
Mhm.
based on places where we can provision in a web garden or a forested environment to have an instance running in Australia or have an instance running um, in the EU. Everybody's got data sovereignty that they're wrapping themselves around, and I
Is
get
it an
it.
instance running or is it actually data harboring? I mean, where your software runs and where the data resides can be two different things too, right? Uh,
When we did it. It was actually running in that environment.
in that
We would provision specifically for an entity.
Mhm.
Um, And when I say we have, multiple brands, we've got two big front end brands, the StratusVue, and then we're white label for one of the ERPs. But the other white labels, one of them is very specifically related to data sovereignty in a foreign nation, where it could not be hosted in our environment. So if you look at that, then you're really relegated to that going up into, I don't want to say FedRAMP because that's a US term, but everybody has their version of a FedRAMP.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you need to go through the security, you need to make it run, you need to prove it up, you need to have they need to attack you. And then once you make it through their certification, you're good to run in their environment under sovereignty laws.
Good. I think amazing. I think broadly what I'm hearing is the maturity level of compliance and regulations is very low in the construction industry. In fact, you're dealing with largely with unregulated data, but probably StratusVue can be a trailblazer in setting the direction and showing the world how to do it and make the world a better place. Not just solving the workflow problem, but also do it securely.
From your lips to every contractor in the world. That's all they need to hear.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I just want you to, you touched on this a little bit, but are there any best practices with respect to that top 3 items that comes to your mind in terms of application security and vulnerability testing? How often should it do it? When should it do it? How frequently? Any best practices that you can build an in-house team, a combination of in-house and external team? Anything that comes to your mind? Yeah.
I think that the most important thing is to let an external entity verify. Somebody who has no sweat in the game of a job or a position or a something that they feel a risk should not be shared. Because we all know developers who my knowledge is my power. If I keep it all inside of this big noggin and nobody knows about it, I'm the only one who knows. That's a risk. It always comes down to a human. So of course, I think that there should be security teams internally. You know what? You've got your application, but you also have your systems. You know what? And somebody needs to have a broad knowledge of how the 3 pieces of what you may do. And it's not just for SaaS, this is for everybody. You know what? Everybody's going to online accounting now. And whether that's a little guy who's using QuickBooks or a big guy who's using Oracle, Oracle spins you up a provision, and it's up to you at some level to understand that. So I still think the most important thing is exposing yourself to somebody else that you can trust your people, but have somebody else verify it.
Trust but verify. I think it seems like deeply, deeply entrenched into everything that you say and do.
It's my life.
Yeah. Yeah,
there was a point.
We do that even though we are a security company. We specialize in application security, but there are different aspects to security, network security, audits, ISO 20. We are ISO 27000. So we also get external entities to again following your trust but verify philosophies.
You know what, everybody used to call it SOC 1 or SOC 2, SOC 2 security and availabilities. You know, and then the thing that drove me most nuts about that was they brought in people who had no clue about software, no clue about hardware. They brought in accountants. You know what? You may as well bring in an economist then. They have, and I looked at this and I'm like, what the actual F are you doing? And then when I looked at what they did, it made sense. It really did. Now that's typically if somebody's walking in that environment, I'll say go to a public cloud, you know, because their SOC certifications for security and availability are already established and maintained.
But
if you
they're
go
also
to
extending, the SOC 2 is also being extended to cloud service providers now. It's not just enough to be hosted in a SOC 2 certified data center. As a cloud service, but
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
you need your certifications.
yeah,
And you know what, I told you they're going to this NIST or DFARS for
yeah,
government contracts here, and they actually put you through a government audit. Now, it's the government, and sometimes I'm shocked that those people have jobs. But they also, for the ones they've brought into these environments, they're very knowledgeable.
yeah.
They know what they're zeroing in on. They know the vulnerabilities that are most likely to be penetrated. And so I think from that level, the subject matter expertise that they're bringing in is actually a good thing.
I have been through NIST and FIPS 2 validation.
Yeah.
In fact, way back in 2001, 2002, I was a developer of the first Java applet, cryptographic
Wow.
FIPS 2 validation, level 2
Yeah.
validation.
Yep.
Uh, and yeah,
And
so they know their job. They all about memory scan is a private key is exposed. You had to do obfuscation in the memory. So even though you might feel it's very painful, it's very bureaucratic, but when you understand it, take a step back. They know what they are doing as well. So there is a lot of smart people. Even though we might hate the speed of and the government in general, but if you look at
yeah,
it from
no,
there, yeah, yeah, yeah,
cryptography is our future. You know what? As soon as they put that up at a bigger level, I think where there's a will, there's a way. But at this point, when they went from SHA-1 to SHA-2 in the
yeah.
cryptographic modules, at some point they're going to ask ChatGPT how to decode SHA-2.
But but you still need
I'm
a
picking
large,
on them today.
yeah. The beauty about those cryptography is you still need a large compute power to actually break it, right?
Yep.
Uh, writing an algorithm to do it is part, but the great thing about cryptography is you can. It's not like keeping everything here. It's transparent.
Uh-huh.
The algorithm is transparent, and it's still tough. That's I think is probably that is one area where, as a security, we have got it right. There is no security by obscurity. It is actually security based on mathematically sound principles of
Agreed.
uh, uh, Right. I think I can keep talking about that too. I mean, besides printing, I have also spent a good chunk of my career on public key cryptography. Yeah. Great. I mean, it's good to get your perspectives. I mean, you're a businessman building software for a specific use case, construction, and it's pretty, uh, I'm pretty impressed to know the level of depth as a businessman and the level of depth that you have specific to security. And as a practitioner, you geeks, you go do it, but as a businessman, you bring in a lot of practical views into it. And these are all the aspects that you need to look at for building a strong business. And as a security practitioner, it is very, very rewarding for me to hear it because I can now truly make the statement it's truly a business enabler and not just buying insurance for something just going wrong, because it is a must have for any business.
Must have.
Yeah. So one final question before I get into a fun round, but uh, any advice to, I mean, any startups, any new startups, what would be your advice to founders? What kind of groundwork would you advise them to do before starting up with respect to compliances and security?
So I know that typically in a bootstrap or a seed round of a startup coming to market, that they go out and they think that they can get an application that will test for them,
Mhm,
that they can buy a piece of software and run it against their code, and they think that they're covered.
mhm,
And it's not true. You know what? Everybody goes, I ran the application and it checked against OS top 10. And so I'm going to release this to production. That
mhm,
is a enormous risk.
mhm.
So when I talk to people about going through and getting a pen test, I'm like, have you had a pen test? And they're like, yeah, they weren't able to get on our network. I'm like, that's not a pen test. A pen test is giving them administrative credentials into your environment and seeing what they can do with those. And they're like, oh, I would never do that. So when I talk to peers or startups or whatever it may be,
Mhm,
um, I know that money is always tight.
mhm,
It's just the way of the world. But there's also a certain amount of comfort in being able to sleep.
mhm,
Because if you are the purpose for somebody logging into a corporate environment that causes disruption either through malware, crypto, or compromise of any level, you're out of business. You're out of business, and that sticks with you. So you learned your lesson, but you come back 2 or 3 years later, and they're going to say, "I want to hear why you learned your lesson." And if you can't formulate that and articulate that in a way that can be consumed by the people making decisions, you may as well just go become an analyst somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So for startups and for smaller entities that think that they can buy a piece of packaged software and they think that that has protected them because they hit all of the punch lists on this application, I'm going to swear, I'm going to say that's bullshit. Hire a company, have it done. Yes, it can be a couple $1,000s. Yes, it can be more than a couple $1,000s.
Yeah.
It is worth your time and effort to actually trust but verify. You're going to hear me say it so many times.
Fantastic.
I
That's
lived through it.
wonderful.
That was my lesson learned.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, and I have heard companies say that we are small, we are not big enough to worry about security because nobody's going to target us. And anything on the public network, if there is a chance of abuse, it's just a matter of time before it gets abused. And the smaller you are, the higher the risk.
I've had people tell me they built everything in AWS, therefore it's secure. Or they put stuff into the AWS cloud so they don't need to do backups. Oh my God, backups. Okay, let's spend a minute on that. You asked for advice. Get a pen test.
You should send them to the concept of shared responsibility that AWS puts in bold letters. It's your application, your responsibility, including security.
But they don't do that. So everybody assumes I'm in AWS. We require, if something's in the cloud, that we get a snowball. We'll get a backup. We still write to tape. So it was interesting because one of the lessons we learned was we had VSS, we had segmented rated, we had backup exec. When we went through all of this, and they systematically knew how to sequence to disable each of the backups. I can't tell you that. And some people are going to say, John, you're too old. Nobody puts anything on tape anymore. You know what? We've seen every entity get compromised. You still need that final check to make sure it happens, and pay someone else to do it. If it's in AWS, get a service that actually sends you a tape once a month to an offsite facility. Back up your data.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Trust but verify. Stick with me. And on that note, I want to get into a rapid fire round. Okay. We have known a lot about your business and specifically how you look at security, but I also want to know a little bit about the person behind the person who built the business. So are you ready for a rapid fire round, John?
Bring it on.
All right. How do you keep yourself updated with technology, specifically security and compliance?
Security and compliance, there's more than enough material out there to be consumed on a regular basis, whether it's from CISA, the NSA, things like ZDNet, dark web reading. I don't expect anybody to be a subject matter expertise in any of it. Well, except my security consultants. But being able to find where the answers lie, because everybody's got a general working knowledge. So we consume a lot of media. Actually, really entertaining was my youngest is in his early 20s, and when he was going through school, he kept telling me about this thing called Reddit. And you know how much, and I'm like, it's another MySpace kind of a thing. But actually, I found from a security standpoint, they've got a great subreddit called Cybersecurity, where you're seeing the generational transition of the young out of school. They were weaned off the database nipple. They are so smart. It's so embedded and entrenched. It's interesting to see that although you have your media and publications, to see the generational transition from the 27 to the 37-year-old range who really understand the quantum mechanics of it all to watch them discuss. I highly recommend cybersecurity as a subreddit to anybody. The rest of it is all through publications and notices. Sign up for the alerts on the known issues, the known exploits. I still run into a lot of people who think they don't understand what a 0 day means. 0 days means you have 0 days. Fix that shit now.
Yeah, it's already too late.
Yeah, it's already too late if they've told you it's a 0 day. So we do a lot of, we rely on our consultants, but we also monitor internally what's going on in a near real time through, I don't want to say social media, but through media and presentation.
And also interesting you mentioned Reddit and the generational change. As a marketeer and a business owner who wants to, the next decision maker, or as a everlasting institution that we are planning to build, if we want to evolve, and the next CISO I want to connect with, or the next business owner I want, might be a 25-year-old who might be consuming his data and best practices from these channels, the Reddit and the subreddit. And as a marketeer, we might want to get our story there and our versions of it. So good point. What do you prefer? Remote work, hybrid, in office?
Yes. I think that just about covers it. So, I had this conversation internally yesterday where the generational transition of people rolling out of university at this point, they've spent the last 2 years doing remote work. I think there's a holistic reward to being able to talk to people face to face. We're talking face to face, but we really can't understand each other's body language. So the water cooler talk. I heavily encourage face to face. That being said, we've been in a remote development environment for some years. Our support is run out of Florida. Our development is run out of Louisville. We have teams in Texas and in Colorado, and that's just the U.S. Then we've got people who dive into the code in Sri Lanka. They're actually our bug fixers who are available every day, every night. Our UI UX team is in Sarajevo. You know what? So we've always been remotely engaged. That being said, I think that at the very minimum, a hybrid requirement. If they're offshore, once a year, if they're near shore, twice a year, that everybody needs to be in the same place. But geographically, we all understand the ADD that comes from working at home. You know what? The dryer makes a noise from the laundry, or
ADD. What's an ADD?
Attention deficit disorder.
Okay.
This is the big, they give you a pill now to keep you focused. But, I'll walk downstairs to get myself a cup of water, and then I'll see something on TV where they figure out he is the baby's daddy.
Yeah.
So I actually believe that in person is something that needs to happen, but I may be in the minority on that.
No, actually, you would have been in the minority a couple of years back, pre-COVID, but post-COVID, people are done with remote working so much that I'm seeing more and more people valuing face-to-face a lot more. Even though they are doing more remote work, they're valuing face-to-face a lot more. I mean, remote work has increased significantly post-COVID, but value for face-to-face has also gone up significantly. So given a chance, they want to do face-to-face. But yeah, good point. Now, shopping malls or beaches? I have a guess. Given where you live in, I already have a clue of what your answer will be, but I'd like to hear. What do you prefer, shopping mall or beaches?
I would take a beach all day long.
Because I heard you say that you're moving to Florida during the winter, and so.
I'm. If you would have said cloudy or sunny, and the sun is more important than the shade in a mall. So
yeah. I mean, I prefer cloud over sun a lot of times because it's better. Sun is hot given the region where. But if I'm in Chicago, I would any day prefer sunny day over. Yeah. Emails, phone calls, text messages. What is your most preferred method of communication?
I'm just going to say yes again. You know what? It's the generational transition of people thinking that they can understand something via a text.
Mhm,
I'm going to give you an actual example. Last year, we were working on a really big enterprise deal.
mhm,
And we were in Houston, and I went up into my hotel room to host this meeting.
mhm,
And our consultants were all downstairs in the meeting room.
mhm.
And I had a great call. I absolutely killed it. And as soon as I was done, I texted everybody downstairs and I said, I absolutely killed it.
Mhm.
And when I went downstairs, everybody was really down and dejected. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And they're like, you killed the deal. I said, no, I killed it. And they said, well, then you should have said you nailed it.
Yeah, nailed it.
So
Yeah.
you know what? They're right. So you can't understand context
Mhm.
from reading.
Yeah.
So, and everybody goes, no, I'm going to ask him if he paid the bill. I'll just send him a quick email.
Mhm.
I'm going to chase some money. I'm going to chase a deal. I'm just going to write an email. You don't understand context. So I'll give you, if it comes to context, phone calls are the method. If it comes to something that has no priority, email is the method. If it comes to something where you actually need my attention, text me. So it happens. All three of them are legitimate communications.
Yeah.
It just,
Yeah. But
what,
context, I think, just like the remote face-to-face versus hybrid mode, uh, when it communication, a voice over, the tone, the way you say it, the context gets lost out. So, yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I mean, reality is, I have not included other forms of communications. Like, I see the lot of younger generations and even my customers, especially the younger ones, asking me, "Why don't you do Slack notification? Why don't you do integrate with this?"
did
Uh,
you hear my eyes roll? Oh.
yeah, yeah, but
It's
but
just a text. It's just
yeah,
a
it's a
different platform.
yeah different plan. Yeah, favorite
What was that?
vacation
What
spot.
was that called? ICQ? Back in the day, the original chat was, I think it
Yeah,
was
ICQ. Yeah,
ICQ.
yeah, ICQ. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, uh, but yeah, what's your favorite vacation spot?
That has changed many times, but I do love Europe, Italy,
Mhm.
um, Switzerland. My family's from Germany. We still have most of our families there. So uh, it, Europe is absolutely, if I can get away for more than a 10-day period, it's Europe. Um, Otherwise, I tend to run really fast for 6 to 8 weeks, and then I'll run for a weekend here, run for a weekend there. It usually involves water.
Yeah. Yeah, my favorite spot is also a location in Europe. It's Austria. I love the
Absolutely.
yeah. So more of a mountains kind of person than beaches. So
No,
Austria.
I'm with you. You know
Yeah.
what? If you think about getting up to Garmisch-Partenkirchen,
Yeah.
and you can get Austria, you can do Germany. You know,
Yeah.
you can. There's some wonderful places in Austria.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Uh, do you prefer with events, in-person events or webinars, virtual events? Again, are you going to say a yes for both?
Um, for me personally, I would prefer in person. But I know that it's the same thing where we need to represent all methods. But if it requires something um, where the human portion of it, I would prefer in person all day long. Even conferences, going up, standing on a stage, I would do that. But that being said, we do have people who do host remote events, remote learning, remote education, remote marketing. You know what? Come and join us for see what's new, and it all has to apply.
I think it used to be death by PowerPoint. Nowadays, people have changed it to death by webinar.
I
So
hate them.
yeah,
You know what? Usually I get my most work done because I'll put it up over here, I'll turn off my
yeah,
camera, and then I'll do everything here and I'll listen and I'll go, what did he say? So I'll
yeah,
stop and I'll listen for a second. Okay, I got it. And then go right back to work over here.
yeah. I think yeah. So I think again, the
Death by
context
webinar.
and the events is all about networking and meeting people. Favorite cuisine? Favorite cuisine?
Oh, you know what? That's interesting. Depends on my mood. But realistically, I would walk down the path of, I'm a big fan of Italian.
Have you?
Big fan of Italian. I do really enjoy Eastern Asian. So I'm going to say, a Vietnamese pho is excellent. I'll take Cantonese as my preferred. But again, it's mood stricken, and then I live on, it takes a lot to maintain this, so a lot of meat and potatoes.
which is a good segue into the next and last question before I be an interesting conversation. Working out or dieting or neither?
Neither.
Neither. Just
Neither. You know what? We went through a battle for many years. I do a little bit of exercise. I watch what I eat. But I'll tell you that actually it was 2020. We took our scales in the house, we threw them away. Because you should be able to notice how your clothes fit. You know what? I don't need to know that I have a delta of a 5-pound swing, up or down. I don't need to know that. As long as I can put on my shirt and still button my collar, I'm okay.
Yeah.
So I think from my family, it was everything in moderation. And as long as you follow those rules and you can still put your suit jacket on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things, and as long as you're happy, it works and everything in moderation, to an extent that once in a while also splurge to not take moderation to extremes as well. So once in a while go to extremes, but everything in moderation is a good way to keep things in balance and stay healthy. So great, John. Really good. It was a fun round. Good to know the person behind who built a great SaaS-based construction business. Wealth of information, mostly practical insights, not just technical insights, but practical insights on how to look at security for building a business, and that too on a construction business. So it's quite amazing, very insightful. I really learned a lot. I'm pretty sure whoever listens in and tunes in will learn a lot too. We'll be creating blogs out of this, transcribes. It's a golden nuggets of information that you have provided us. Thanks a lot.
Share it with me. I'll share it as well here stateside. Get your message out.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks.